I will start by welcoming everybody to the STEAM Network webinar series for 2024. It has been we've had wonderful speakers so far and anticipate many throughout the rest of the year. And we are very happy to have Dr. Jani Ingram present today. For those unfamiliar, our STEAM network is a program to support underrepresented minority scholars conducting or interested in conducting cancer health disparities research across the Southwest. And this includes 4 institutions to date, and then the Burrell College of Osteopathic Medicine, New Mexico State University, Northern Arizona University, and UNM Comprehensive Cancer Center, and HSC. So that's the Health Sciences Center. So not just the Cancer Center itself. We host webinars, and we have a listserv that is actively in development, but we are starting to use to disseminate different opportunities such as professional development and employment, as well as funding opportunities. So if you're interested in being part of that listserv in general too, please let us know and we can add you. And so today we are going to be recording the webinar if it's not already. And following the webinar, please be sure to look for an email to complete an evaluation of the webinar series. And there's also going to be a QR code available at the end that we will share, and you're welcome to use that QR code to use for the evaluation. I will now hand it over to Dr. Jani Ingram, who will be presenting. She's a member of the Navajo Nation, and she is a researcher conducting research in environmental health. She's going to be discussing cultural and ethical research guidelines for working with on tribal lands and with tribal communities. And she has lots of experience doing this across the Southwest, and we really look forward to her presentation today entitled Working with Native, that's entitled something slightly different, but essentially working with Native American populations through cancer health disparity research. So thank you very much, Dr. Ingram. Please take it away.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. I am looking forward to actually sharing. It's kind of a 3-part presentation. So I'm just going to launch in. But before I get started, I first wanted to let you know that I am in Flagstaff, Arizona, where Northern Arizona University is, and we sit at the base of sacred mountains to many of the tribes in our area. And so I'm just really blessed to be able to work here in Flagstaff in the shadow of these mountains. And then I also wanted to give you a little bit of background about who I am. So I was not born on the Navajo Nation. I was born and raised in Kingman, Arizona, which if you've been to Las Vegas, you might have passed through Kingman. It's in the northwest part of Arizona. So I'm going to introduce myself in Navajo. So Yate, She, Jani Ingram, Yanishe, Naanish Deji, Tachini Nishle, Bilagana Bashis Chin, Kintanchini Dashis Che, Bilagana Dashis Nali. So you can kind of see these are my parents, Jan and Dave Cunningham. I get my Navajo from my mom and my Bilagana, or my white side, from my dad. And then like I said, I didn't grow up on the reservation, but I spent summers with my grandma, shown here. And so in addition to being a daughter and a granddaughter, I'm also a mom. So on the bottom is my family. So I have 3 kids, Jordan, Jaleesa, and Josh, and my husband, James. So in addition to having biological children, I also have what I call chemistry children. So these are some pictures of my kids that I've worked with at NAU over time, and really a mix of different ethnic backgrounds, different disciplines at different stages, worked with as young as a middle school student. And then I have had a couple doc students. So it's been awesome just meeting and learning from them. So that's part of the reason why I do what I do. So the beginning of this talk is going to be actually from my colleague, Francine Gauchapin, who is at the University of Arizona. She's a member of the Jemez Pueblo tribe, and she has done a lot of work in Indigenous institutional review boards and just working with Indigenous folks. As you'll see when I get to the middle part of the talk, she and I are PIs on a large National Cancer Institute grant. But what I wanted to start out with is kind of laying a foundation for how to work with Native populations. So really doing community engaged research, and really important, the dissemination. So shown here are some things I'm going to talk about a little bit, but strategies for working with Native communities, what are the guidance that, particularly if you're not familiar with working Native communities, and some of the best practices that you can use. So hopefully people are at least somewhat familiar with American Indian, Alaska Native groups in the United States, being in, I think probably lots of people are in the Southwest, but different tribes are sovereign, which means they have their own governance, and really you treat them as such. So you have to get permissions to work with different groups, and different tribes have different structures. And so you don't want to just say, well, I've worked with this tribe, and so that means everyone's that way, because that's definitely not the case. The US population is about 1.7% folks that identify as American Indian or Alaska Native. As you can see, median age is 29, which is much younger than the 38. So there is a lower life expectancy. And so I'm going to focus a bit on cancer. This is funded by the National Cancer Institute, plus that's a lot of the work that I've been doing. And so in American Indian, Alaska Native populations, it is the second leading cause of death, and it also tends to be diagnosed in later stages with lower survival rates. So this is just showing you some of the cancers that have higher incidences in Native populations compared to non-Hispanic whites. So you can see liver cancer, kidney, colorectal, stomach, and lung. The lung is definitely tribe sort of specific. Some tribes really have a high use of tobacco and smoking. Other tribes not so much. And so again, it's not the same across all the populations. So this is just showing you in this middle graph, kidney cancer, liver cancer, and breast cancers within the Alaska Native American Indian populations. I have a project right now focused on kidney cancer. On Navajo, kidney cancer is about twice higher incidence than in the non-Hispanic white population. So that is a health disparity in terms of cancer. So how do we as researchers or people working in the field, try to lower these incidence rates? So really trying to do interventions that are culturally appropriate, trying to figure out, is there exposures that folks are being, that have things that we can, really work towards. So here it says tobacco and alcohol, but quite honestly, at the end of this talk, I'm going to talk about some environmental exposures, which is what I do. And then also increasing the access to just health services out on these tribal lands. That's a very big issue. So we know that there are social determinants of health. They do differ to some extent for Native populations, again, depending on where these tribes are. And so for example, I'm going to talk a little bit about water issues, water insecurity, and sanitation. Living conditions can be very, very rural, so very difficult. And then both agriculture and also food sovereignty can be an issue. So, and then housing is another thing. There tends to be multi-generations in a lot of the homes out on tribal lands. So things to think about if you want to engage in working with Native American tribes in terms of cancer research, screening, and prevention. So definitely the trust building is the most important thing. It takes time, but if you can, really build those relationships, you definitely can start to see, a partnership growing, and really trying to, be sure that you're not doing things that are actually harming that population, but really benefiting, which is obviously what all of us want to do, but sometimes it's unintentional if we don't understand the culture. So some of the things to think about in terms of working with tribal groups. Definitely, again, these groups are sovereign nations. And so you need to get tribal approval and really go into the research with humility, listening, not maybe saying, I have your answer. That definitely turns most tribal folks off. Research can be actually sort of an ugly word because there has been inappropriate things done over time. So just keeping those things in mind. The community-based focus is really important, where the listening comes in, understanding what the concerns are, and sort of building projects based on that. Knowing that if you do work with tribes, that they do own the data. And so you're working together to determine what data or results the tribe is comfortable with you disseminating, either in scientific publications or even with, in community groups and that kind of thing. Definitely being as transparent as you can, it builds the trust. So I think sometimes people try to sort of hedge maybe their consent forms or other things so that they can do things a little broader without having to really discuss with the community. That is definitely a no-no. If you're familiar with the Havasupai case back in the early 2000s, that's exactly what happened. Really working with folks in the tribe and really building their capacity to do the work, because particularly if you're working on a 2-year grant, a 5-year grant, that might be when the funding ends, but you don't want to be the people that say, okay, my money's gone, I'm out. Is to really build capacity so that the work that you're doing can continue, can grow. And that's only done if you really are working closely with the community. And really just building in the community experiences and expectations to what you're doing. So one of the things that Francine has done is she has put together a brochure, sort of info piece of information so that you can have this. I'm going to show at the end a QR code that you can find this, but if it's too quick, you can definitely go to the website for the Native American Cancer Prevention, which I'm going to talk about after this section of the talk. So best practices, definitely first thing is you have to know that the tribe can say, no, you cannot do this. And so that when you go through the approval process, it's important to understand the concerns, because if you understand the concerns, then the project is going to focus on those concerns. And myself, I have never had an issue, but it's really building that trust and listening and building those projects around the community concerns. Some conditions for trying to publish, you might have to not have a tribal identified in your publication. You might have to pull some of the information that the tribe would consider sacred, and that type of thing. Different tribes have different concerns about things like biospecimen use, definitely genetic research. I know, Navajo right now has a moratorium on genetic research, although I'm part of a work group that is trying to lift some of those bans. And then definitely clinical trials. I'm going to talk about that in the next slides. Training folks is really important, whether they be community folks or really, it's really important if you can involve students from those tribes. That really is another way to, be able to build the capacity. And so that's this last section right there. So clinical trials are so critical to moving health science forward, correct? But there are a lot of distrust from a lot of tribes in involving being involved in a clinical trial. And so you really want to think hard, because there are benefits for sure. So things like thinking about doing something in the multi-system care that the many tribal folks experience, whether it's Indian Health Services, IHS, or a tribally run healthcare service like the Tuba City Regional healthcare center, whether they're an urban, like an urban Indian healthcare center. So just having to navigate that, and then really thinking about some of the benefits to the tribe, whether it's just purely research or if there's a treatment involved. So thinking about that, making sure that the informed consent is very clear. And it's also something that is pretty, I mean, this is a little bit outside of the NIH approach, but trying to make sure that the person knows this is what we're doing. We're not going to do things outside of what we're consenting. Like I said, biospecimen use can be very tricky. So tribe to tribe, different types of biospecimens are almost totally out. So you want to understand that. Understanding the requirements of the trial, you know, and what burden is on the community in terms of that, and then definitely some privacy if you're going to involve some of the traditional healing or holistic approaches, you know, that could be considered sacred and really should not be broadcast to the general public. Some more thoughts on this, you know, thinking about personalized care, which, you know, brings in a little bit of the genetics. And so trying to have folks understand that, you know, this could actually improve outcomes, as well as it says, demystifying what a trial is, how does it work, type of thing, you know, helping patients understand that, you know, this is a clinical trial, but, you know, where does this go beyond just the trial? Looking at access as well. This could be tricky if folks are in very rural areas to get folks that are able to actually participate. There's, to my knowledge, there's one oncology center, you know, on tribal land in Tuba City on Navajo Nation, but really trying to get more cancer centers, if nothing else, involved in some of the healthcare systems that are out on tribal lands. Looking at, you know, how much does it cost to do this, and trying to get the funding groups to understand the importance, but also some of these difficulties that you might have, that maybe not difficulties, but differences in approaches that you're going to have to take compared to working with sort of a typical clinical trial. We talked, like I said, the biospecimen bank. There are tribes that use this native biodata consortium, which is in South Dakota. I was just at a meeting that I heard a talk from someone who oversees this, which is really awesome because they are very careful about how those biospecimens are used. There's also a biospecimen bank up in Anchorage with the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium. Again, very, very careful about those specimens. So assuming that you're going to be able to just take a specimen as you would with a typical clinical trial, you want to think through that process. And definitely training, very important. And then, you know, if you're going to, you know, provide this information, as it says, secondary use to other researchers, you need to get permissions for that. So, like I said, this was a talk that actually my colleague Francine Gauchapin put together. So this is her contact information along with the QR code, that if you're interested to get more information about working with tribal communities, this is a great resource. So I'm now going to move into a couple examples of working with tribes. So the first one is the Partnership for Native American Cancer Prevention, which is a National Cancer Institute U54 partnership between a minority serving institution, which is Northern Arizona University, and a comprehensive cancer center, which is at the University of Arizona. So this is a picture of Francine. This is me. We are the PIs of this project, with co-PIs Jason Wilder and Melissa Herbst Kravitz. And then our people that really run the show, our program managers, Maria Prabat here and Maria Jackson. So our partnership is really symbolized by this, this graphic that we use a lot to really explain what we are as a partnership. And so you see 4 hands. So the first hand has saguaro cactus, sort of symbolizing Tucson and the University of Arizona. The next hand has people, so this is the communities that we serve. The next hand has both the prayer feather, and this is supposed to be like a high rise, symbolizing the National Cancer Institute who fund us. And then lastly, the last hand has a mountain, which is symbolizing Northern Arizona University. And so this really, we try to, kind of adhere to that the hands are equal, that we work together, really focused on cancer health disparities in Native populations, and really mostly in the state of Arizona, but also there's some overlap into the Southwest. So like I said, we're funded by NCI. We started in 2002 and have been continuously funded since that time. And really our goal is to try to reduce the cancer burden in Native American populations, to increase the number of Native American investigators working in cancer research, and then just increasing the total number of investigators working in cancer health disparities in Native populations. So if you're in New Mexico, we're next door. So the colored areas are tribal lands. There's 22 tribes in the state of Arizona. And then if you're not familiar, Flagstaff is here. The University of Arizona is down here in Tucson, so it's about 260 miles apart. But it's kind of helpful, well, it is helpful because really a lot of times we at NAU are focused a bit more on the tribes in the north, whereas Tucson is focused on the tribes in the south. But we do work very closely together. And we have different cores within our partnership. So an outreach core that works with the tribal communities and with researchers to better understand how to do community engaged research. We now have this guides program, which is, I have to use my cheat sheet, guiding U54 investigators to something sustainability, sorry. But this is really to help early stage investigators to be successful. We also have the Research Education Core, which really focuses on students and giving them mentored research experiences and professional development. We've had very good success working with a number of Native tribes. We also have a planning and evaluation group that really assesses the things that we do and gives us a lot of feedback as to how we can improve things. And then we have different research projects that really are focused on different cancer issues within different tribes. And then of course, the admin kind of oversees all this. So one of our advisory groups, so we have 3 advisory groups, one internal, so folks from NAU and the University of Arizona, one external, so experts throughout the country, but a really important one is our community advisory board. So their pictures are shown here, folks from a lot of different backgrounds. So this is just the list of who they are, if they do have tribal affiliation. For example, Ann Garcia isn't a member of the Tohono O'odham, but she is very involved with their Department of Health and Human Services. So we just have very different folks that help to give us advice, guidance, and really, particularly when we have research projects that either are proposed and they do a really good review of, is this culturally appropriate? And then as those projects that are funded go forward, how can they play a role in advising? So our community, our outreach core has done a lot of work with different tribal communities, including providing workshops and really, reaching out to a number of the tribal health directors to give either advice or, provide guidance. We were blessed to have Dr. Jill Biden, the First Lady, come to the University of Arizona, and she met with Francine to talk about Native American cancer health disparities. There's been a webinar, the Indigenous Cancer Prevention. So you can see all the different states that are colored or states that folks have attended these webinars. And many of the folks that have attended are recognized or identify as American Indian Alaska Native. So these are some podcasts as well. So we've had podcasts focused on breast cancer, on women's well health, men's well health. So these videos, just trying to really reach as many folks as we can. These came about really in the pandemic when tabling events, which is kind of a typical outreach approach, going to health fairs, all that was shut down. And so we kind of took a pivot and came through with other ways to try and reach our communities. So we just are very thankful to work with the different tribal community partnerships, as well as all of our advisory committee folks to giving us guidance, and of course our funding source. And really very important is our students and their families. All right, so hopefully you're still with me. The last portion of this is another example. This is very specific to my research lab. So we work in my lab looking at environmental health exposures. And so we've worked with a lot of different environmental samples. And I'm going to focus today on water, but we've looked at soil, plants, livestock, and we're starting to do more work with particulate or dust. So this talk is actually focused on looking at unregulated water sources out on Navajo. So unregulated means that they are really meant for livestock. So they were put in place for this more rural life. But as you'll see, there is water insecurity. So these are used by a lot more than just the livestock. So this talk is actually a combination of things that I've done with Joe Hoover, who is at University of Arizona, but a lot of the work that we did early on was when he was postdocing at University of New Mexico, as well as Daniel Bean, who is now finishing up his doctoral work at University of New Mexico. Tommy Rock, who was a student in my lab, but now is a professor here at NAU. Jonathan Credo, who was also a student in my lab, but went on to get his MD PhD at the University of Arizona, is now just starting his residency at University of California, Davis. And then Lindsay Jones, who got her master's with me and now works for a nonprofit group in Arizona, Water Infrastructure Finance Authority. So those are pictures of us all out in the field. So if you're not familiar, Navajo Nation, or Dene Bakea, is in the Four Corners region of the Southwest. It's a large landmass, 27,000 square miles. They say it's about the size of West Virginia. The reservation itself was established through the Treaty of 1868, but it became a sovereign nation in 1923. The capital is in Window Rock, which is about somewhere right here. And so what you're seeing is these different colored regions. So each colored region is what we call an agency. But you might think about them as far as it's like a state within the Navajo Nation. And then you see smaller areas that have names on them that you can't read. But those are what are called chapters. There's 110 chapters. And those I would call kind of like counties within those states. And then in the midst of Navajo is the Hopi Reservation as well. And so I'm going to focus on water, and water is very precious out on Navajo. Many of the homes lack infrastructure, as in they estimate 20 to 30%, with other people having, even if they have indoor plumbing, it's not as reliable. The area out in Navajo is very arid. It's got issues with drought. It also has political issues with water rights, although I think they've just passed something that is going to help in terms of use of the Colorado River. So a lot of folks do haul their water for their household use. And if it's convenient, that water can come from these non-regulated or livestock wells. So just the cost of that to a Navajo person, typically if you are in an urban setting, it's maybe $600 per acre foot of water, whereas if you're a Navajo person, hauling that water is $43,000 per acre foot, so 70 times more. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how the COVID pandemic really impacted this water insecurity. So this is just a picture of, again, he's now my colleague, Tommy Rock, hauling water at a site. So this hopefully makes it clearer. So this map is, again, the Navajo Nation. And the darker than area, those are areas that really have a high number of homes that do not have piped water. So you can see here on the southwest area, that's very, it's a dark area. Up here, this is where Monument Valley is, sort of in the middle here, and a few other places. And then the orange is a few more people have plumbed water and so forth. So it really is an issue, particularly on the west side of Navajo. So these are just some examples of what these wells might look like. So you might have a big tank with a windmill trying to pump the water up. Sometimes those are also connected to like a livestock trough, which is shown here, which is not too difficult. You can turn this little spout here and connect a hose and get water that way. Otherwise, you need to climb onto something and put your hose into the tank and get water, as is shown here. There also are hand pumps, and then there's seepage sites as well. And you can see this says livestock water only, but this one is kind of a seepage site. It's pretty muddy. I don't know that people would drink that water, but definitely people, potentially could be using these other sites. So in addition to insecurity, there was a lot of uranium mining out on Navajo during the mid 1900s. So this map again is Navajo Nation, and you see these X's. Those X's are abandoned uranium mines. So there's over 500 AUM is abandoned uranium mine sites, and over 1,200 mine features, which means, there was an attempt to mine, but it didn't actually produce the ore. So as a result, these things were just left behind. And so only a few have been remediated at this point. And so there are concerns that this is because of all this heavy mining, there was groundwater contamination. Also, the mining was different in different parts of Navajo. Here in the western side, it was open pit mining, so ore taken from the surface. Other areas, it was underground mining shafts. So I'm going to talk about, in particular, two publications out of my group. The first one was spearheaded by Jonathan Credo. He's shown here. He's the MD PhD student this is really his undergraduate work. He's pretty amazing. He's also a member of the Navajo Nation. And then the other was done by Lindsay Jones, who's shown here, who really focused on the western side of Navajo for her master's work. And so in my group, I came to NAU in 2002, and in 2003 started collecting water and have been doing that ever since I've come. So we've expanded our water sampling really based on community folks interested in having us test their water. And also if a student is from a community, they always say, can we go to our, can I go get water samples? And of course. So I'm going to talk just briefly about trying to get the information back to the community, which if you're going to do this work, that is very, very important. And if you're not, then if you decide you're just going to kind of skip the dissemination, then you should not be doing research out on tribal lands. So very important. So this is another map, super busy, of the Navajo Nation. And so here's where I am in Flagstaff. And so all those yellow stars are livestock wells that my group collected water from over about a span of 3 or 4 years for this publication. And all of them were sampled at least 3 times just to see if there was variability. In addition, there are other designations. The green kind of dots are samples that were collected by the Army Corps of Engineers back in the late 1990s. There's some from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and also the orange ones are from the US EPA. And then it's very hard to see, but these big red dots are areas that really are focused with abandoned mines. So just as an example, the paper really goes into a lot more detail. This is the paper by Jonathan Credo, but this is one way that we provide information back to the communities by showing them a graph where it has a concentration in micrograms per liter, so that's part per billion. And then this one just takes a smattering. There's almost 300 wells that were looked at for that paper, but this is just looking at different wells across the Navajo Nation. And here we have arsenic values, it turns out arsenic is an issue, because if you look at this horizontal line, that is the drinking water standard set by the Environmental Protection Agency. So what we tell folks is if those bars are above that line, you really don't want to be drinking this water. You can see this well in particular is pretty high, almost 70 parts per billion, with the drinking water standard at 10. Same information over on the other side, uranium. Now, the only difference now is that the drinking water standard is at 30 part per billion. So again, you can see exceedances, particularly this well here at 160 part per billion. All right, so the other paper I want to talk a little bit about is from Lindsay Jones. So shown here, actually presenting at an agency meeting. And so she looked at the western side of Navajo. So the dots are all the unregulated wells that she examined. And then again, the X's are those abandoned mines. So you can see it's really focused in the southern part of Western Agency. And the mining there was, as I mentioned before, is open pit mining. So she looked at 82 of these unregulated water sources and definitely sampled them multiple times. So what she did with her data is she put together what's called a risk map. And so this is just showing again for arsenic and uranium, areas where she found higher concentrations, as in 190 to 235 part per billion. Again, the drinking water standard is 10. So that's really high. And you can see they are focused mostly in the southern part with this sort of outlier, both in the arsenic and for the uranium. Turns out I was at a meeting in Anchorage, but met a Navajo woman from this Lachee community. And so we're going to try and connect with her and go back up and sample this, because these are kind of understandable because they are in the mining sort of region. This one is a little bit of an outlier. So in order to provide this information back to the community, what Lindsay did was to put together a booklet where she had on the pages facing each other a map of that community or that chapter, and then where on the map the samples that she collected, so the different wells. And then on the other side, facing the map, would be these bar plots that I talked about before, where you have a concentration on the y-axis and then the different wells on the x-axis. And she superimposed the uranium and arsenic information and then put the drinking water standards. She then kind of explained what she saw in a paragraph. So this is the example of loop. And she did this for every chapter that she looked at. And honestly, we had really good response, because not only did we put these booklets together and take them to the chapters, but then she did a presentation explaining what she saw. We also had at that time a student, Tasha Nez, in the lab who had very good Navajo skills. So she not only went to those meetings with Lindsay to discuss the results in the Navajo language, which is really important because a lot of times the elderly that come to these meetings do not speak very good English. And then she also had, Tasha also wrote a summary in Navajo in these booklets. And so that seemed to be a really good approach because people could also take booklets to their neighbors who weren't at that meeting. And so lastly, I just want to end with, where the impact of some of the work that we've done. So back in 2018, my lab and folks from the University of New Mexico working, Jani Lewis heading that group, we've been talking for a while and really found out, like, we have a lot of water data on these unregulated wells, but they have some, we have some, other groups have some. So we worked specifically with Joe Hoover and Daniel Bean, and then students from my lab, to combine all of this water information into a database so that the tribe could have a better feeling for the entire Navajo Nation. So we completed that around the end of 2019. And so it looks something like this. There was over 1,000 water sources, and depending on the data, we had up to 158 different analytes of interest. And so you can see all those triangles are the different wells that we looked at. and what kinds of information that we provided. And the way it was provided was, oh, well, the way it was provided, and actually Daniel's working on this, is to really be able to hover over these spots, and then that would pull up the information that we have on that particular unregulated well. So what was the impact? Well, COVID hit, as we all know, the beginning of 2020, and on Navajo, it would hit really hard. At one point, it was the highest rate of COVID-19 infections. And so why did this affect the water insecurity problems? Well, because Navajo Nation had lockdowns, meaning that they wanted people to stay at their homes over the weekend, prime time for doing your water hauling, or curfews where they wanted folks to come home from work or whatever and be at home after 5. So this became really difficult for folks who are forced to haul their water. And so, like I said, it was estimated there's about 30% of the households who don't have running water. And so my group, University of New Mexico, folks from the government, folks from nonprofits, got together with the Navajo Water Access Group, and there was a database that was put together partly with the information that we had, so that folks could try to better understand where can we get safe water, because maybe their typical hauling area is too far to try and get to during the curfews or the lockdowns. And so this was something that was really, helpful in terms of getting information. So for example, you hover over this point right here and it brings up all this information. And so it's an interactive, it says map, to really understand where you can get safe water. And so I'm just going to end with a couple slides on dissemination. Super important, like I said, but at the same time, not as straightforward as you might think. So this is a picture of, again, when Tommy was in my lab. He invited folks from Cameron to Flagstaff, went out, got them in a van so that they could better understand what we were doing with the samples that we collected. And then this is Lindsay doing one of her presentations, report backs on her work. But what we found was that just by putting in radio announcements and flyers to try and get people to come to these dissemination meetings where that's all that was happening, people are busy and we didn't get very good turnout. So instead, we found it is much better to work with a grassroots organization. So people within the community organizing the report back, actually piggybacking on other events happening at these community buildings, that type of thing. And then I talked about the booklet that Lindsay put together. So we actually wrote a paper up, really the lessons learned in disseminating. So with that, I'm going to end. That's my third section. And just thank Mike Ketter, who is now emeritus at NAU, but super helpful with all the chemistry. Of course, our Navajo community partners in the government. We work closely with Dr. Jani Lewis and their group, the Navajo Water Access Coordination Group, like I said, who's really put out a lot of this information, my lab students, and all these folks who have funded the work that we've done. So with that, I will open it up to questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. What a great presentation. At this point, anyone feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can send it into the chat if you prefer.
I'm coming from a particularly different area. We have an Autism Center of Excellence grant, and we would really like to understand how we can bring some trainees from the tribes, how we could build those relationships to have them come and understand. I'm completely ignorant about the access to mental health or the needs to mental health. But from what little I know, it strikes me that we could have a very beneficial two-way dialogue, because since we're focusing on autism, I feel fairly sure the tribes know about this, and there are some native practices that would be useful for us to know about, as well as what we're doing might be useful to the tribes. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think sort of outside of my expertise, but actually right down the alley of my husband's. So he's worked with tribal folks in terms of different disabilities, and NAU actually has some very good experts in that area. So maybe if I can put my email in the chat, if you want to send me a note, and I can try and put you in contact with some of these folks.
Thank you.
Though I will say, I did work at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital for about 11 years, and I was on the brain cancer team. So
Oh,
I do
nice.
have an interest in cancer. I don't know to what degree pediatric cancer is an issue with the tribes.
It is. That's one that I, haven't focused on, but yeah, it definitely is an issue. And the question is, is there elevated areas, my work is in environmental health, so environmental exposures, is there some issues there?
Yeah, I know we saw, well, St. Jude, there's a cancer alley down by Baton Rouge. So I know we had some environmental issues.
Yep, oil
certainly
and gas
coming from that. I
industry.
don't know to what degree, the tribal lands have them also.
Mhm.
So Jenny, I have a question. This is something that we discuss often and have various kind of responses to and thoughts about. But for those of us who do kind of general population work, and we're just kind of working with kind of all comers, maybe we're not necessarily targeting like
Sure.
a tribe or specific. How do you approach someone? I mean, other than kind of a general consent process or whatever, but what are the considerations that you can take under advisement or would provide to any of us who, are working with someone who maybe like we're recruiting at a health center. And so it could be anyone from any background. When we have a Native person come in and we're going to consent to that, how do you take that? How do you approach that?
Yeah,
Considering the size.
yeah. I would say to, find out, first of all, are they interested, obviously, but also then where would their interests lie, and would they be interested in being involved, and if it would, benefit, because tribal people tend to not think about me, but us, like community. So you might need to talk about the benefits to not just me, but to the us type of thing.
Mhm.
So that might be a little bit different than someone, oftentimes, obviously, if you need help now, you kind of get more focused on that, but that tends to be a little bit more of a difference, and that's partly like an example was the vaccine rates out on Navajo, because it was really pitched as, how are we going to help us as a community? Not, it's my right, I get to decide what to do. So just thinking about that a little bit differently. And then, maybe finding out what their tribal affiliation is, and are there things that are not going to work, because of cultural reasons, because, there are, again, the tribes differ a lot. So in our part of the world, Hopi and Navajo have very different spiritual, focus. So you just have to ask those questions as well. So.
Thank you. We did have one question in the chat, so I'm going to read it aloud. So, do you know if there are continued issues still present on Navajo Nation, such as mining, that continually present as challenges for access to clean water?
Yes. Yes. And partly because it's been the slowest. I mean, they finished mining in like 1980-ish, and there's been maybe 4 mines cleaned up. And so there definitely is issues. Some of it, there's Chris Shuey has done a ton of work out on this, but it definitely is something that I think needs to be, attacked even stronger than what people are doing now, because there is sort of pushback from the industry saying, the reason why we mined out there on at least Navajo or on the Colorado Plateau is because uranium was enriched. Okay, but we don't really know what baseline, before they, went in and started doing things within the Earth's surface, how that changed the water quality and that kind of thing. And then on top of that is drought and access. So the water tables have shifted and changed. And so that also can, you know, concentrate to some extent or change the water chemistry anyway. So there definitely is a lot of issues, and definitely people really, really would like to, the Navajo people and the Hopi people and the other people who are really being, you know, are living in the midst of it, is to have action, like clean it up. There has been a lot of slowness. I work a lot with the Cameron community, and it just, like, there's EPA is out there doing something, but it's just so slow. So.
And I also see that in the chat, Chris Shuey has put in the GIS interactive website. So if anyone is interested in looking further into that. There's another question in the chat that says, thank you, Dr. Ingram. Please, can you say how the community played a part in acquiring funding? I know you mentioned being funded from 2002 from NCI. So where are they involved, or how you sent your proposal to the project to get it started?
Great. So our partnership actually started with a conversation between a biochemist at the University of Arizona, Louise Canfield, and a father of one of her Navajo biochem students. So they began talking, and he was talking about the cancers out on Navajo and something should, you know, someone really needs to look at this. And then this opportunity, this partnership, U54 came about, and that's really where it started. And since then, it has just grown. And early on, we did a little bit more of basic cancer science, which is great, but it really wasn't focused on the health disparities for Native populations. So we have moved to more population-based research projects, or that the basic science is looking at a health disparity that is specific to a tribal group that, you know, why is that type of thing. But it's a constant, in our community advisory group has played a huge role, as well as then if your project, let's say you're working with the Pascal Yaqui tribe, you're going to work directly with some of their folks at the tribal level to understand, you know, where should this research go, that type of thing. Yeah.
Right. Couple more questions. How difficult was it to, so from the chat, nice work. How difficult was it to locate and get access to all those wells for testing?
It was, it was difficult. So my first try at this, we got this, it was called, I can't remember, but the Army Corps of Engineers Atlas put out an atlas, and they had kind of a map. So we went out to look for these wells, just me and some students, and we failed. So it wasn't working. So we worked directly with community folks. They got in the car with us and they showed us how to find these wells. And that ever since has been, you know, the best approach, because they can also tell you a little bit about, you know, in their opinion, how many people access that well, you know, and does it go dry sometimes? So you get so much more information, but you also can find the well. Because there are definitely wells that you think, who in the world could get to this well? And then a car drives up with a, you know, a tank in the back, and you're like, okay, people are using this. So definitely community engagement is the only way to be able to do that. And approval. So we go to the chapters or the communities, you know, this is what we're doing, get the approval there. And then that's also the place where you can get in contact with those community folks.
Great. One other question I have here, it says, have you heard of the Native Biodata Consortium? There may be some good partnerships there, this person says.
Yeah, I'm just learning about those. Actually, I was at this workshop up in Anchorage, and that's where I've gotten more connected to people outside of my little sphere. So yeah.
So we have another question that says, can this presentation be shared after this meeting? As part of this STEAM webinar series, I can tell you we are recording. It will be posted for access. So there'll be a link available in a few days from the STEAM website. And that's where you can access previous presentations that have already been conducted, as well as see the list of upcoming ones. And with that in mind, I will share my last slide. That is essentially the information for our the QR code for the evaluation as well as a link. I don't know that anyone can really click on that right now, but you will get an email reminder as well as the QR code or link in your email to please complete the quick evaluation that helps us with our programming and planning overall, but including for our webinar series. And a plug for our next presentation, which will be toward the end of July by Dr. Andrew Sussman of the University of New Mexico, talking about fostering academic and community research partnerships. So a little bit of an extension of this one in some ways. And so if we have, and so that's that, just a quick reminder, we are available STEAM at salud.unm.edu or at the STEAM website. And let me check the chat for any last minute. Oh yeah, the link is in the chat if anybody's interested, additional webinar link, and any additional questions before we get started, before we head out the rest of our days. Oh, Kristen, go ahead, please.
Yeah, sorry, I think this is short, but Jani, could you talk a little bit about the sensitivity of that dissemination? Like when you go to a group and say, we found this in your water, is this confirming they simply already know, or they knew, but it's so much worse, or they have no idea?
Right. Yeah, no, that's a very good point. So what we try to do is to go to the community folks that we believe are using that particular well, and tell them first, so that it's not like they're hearing this from their neighbors, because a lot of times they don't know. They go oftentimes on taste, and taste is more like saltiness or, mineral content, and you can't really taste the uranium in the water. So, so that's step one. And then we disseminate to that community, not on the bigger scale. And that's when we can get community folks saying, we want this information, but we don't want the world to know. So that's where we can understand whether we're going to pull back and not disseminate beyond that. So yeah, really important, constantly, sort of trying to go to the most impacted and kind of move up. And then when there's pushback, that's when we're, okay, because really biggest point is to get this information to the folks who need it, and whether they need to maybe think about a different well is, the bottom line.
Thank you so much, Jani. Wonderful presentation. Really appreciate it. And thank you everybody for attending. We look forward to seeing you next month. All right. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye-bye.